Job done then by South Africa. Like they did in Johannesburg, they have managed to chase in excess of 200 and win by 7 wickets at Cape Town. They take this series 2-1. Thought after all the odds that were stacked up against them, after losing Rick Nokia before the series, Quinton de Kock after the first test, and losing that first test, that they would come around and come from behind against the best team in the world to make it a series win. Daryll Cullinan will have plenty to say, I'm sure, as we look at a number of highs, perhaps the highest of highs, Daryl, for South Africa, because you knew what all was riding on this series. The pressure for the support staff, all the nonsense that's gone on beyond the field in the build-up to this series over the last couple of years. What is your feeling after this series win? How big is it?
It was a brilliant win, and it couldn't have come at a better time, quite frankly, Ronak. I mean, as you mentioned, it's been a tough time for South Africa off the field. I'm sure Mark Boucher is very relieved, Dean Elgar, but you've got to give credit to South Africa. I thought they stuck to it. They played solid test cricket, and the way they were able to turn it around, I thought, was through some brilliant individual performances, and the rest of the team followed up. But all of South African cricket, we know how tough it is to beat India. The fact that they've beaten India at home after being one down, one can't say enough about which has been a really good all-round team performance.
Let's talk about the batting, shall we, Daryl? Because you could say even in Henrik Nokia's absence, they had the firepower with Rabada and Ngidi, guys who would trouble India's batters on this tour. But we thought South Africa's batting is suspect. It got even worse after de Kock's retirement. Here they are now, having lost 3 tosses, and Chase played in the fourth innings in 2 test matches and made, at the end of it, fairly light work of targets we thought would be challenging.
Yes, the good thing is that we've seen the emergence of Keegan Peterson. I did mention that in tough batting conditions, he played well. He'll come across better conditions, but he looks the part there. It's early days, but I was really impressed with his footwork. So that's a massive plus for South Africa. Dean Elgar, very strong up front. I thought Van der Dussen had his moments. He occupied the crease, but didn't quite look the sort of player that as fluent that I was hoping that he would be. But the other one to emerge has been Bavuma. I hope he's turned the corner because, again, in trying conditions, he played some good test cricket. We knew big scores weren't always going to be possible. You always felt in all 3 tests that there was a ball with your name on it, which was probably going to get you out. But I thought by and large, if you take Markram, who battled, South Africa batted well in bits and pieces, and they got little partnerships going all the way down, with Janssen even making a contribution, coming in at 7. And it was a story of both sides batting. I'd said in an interview with one of your daily newspapers before the series that I thought the side that batted the best would win the series. And I suggested the best way to take on India would be on bowler-friendly wickets. But they were so friendly, exaggerated movement. Perhaps you can argue that if you're on the better side of plays and misses more often, you probably were going to win, which is not really the right thing to be saying when it comes to test match or the type of wicket that you've got.
I mean, we've had so much to admire about Keegan Peterson. You've also mentioned Dean Elgar, Temba Bavuma through the course of this series, but we have to talk about the bowling units. I wonder if, again, we're almost at the cost of repeating ourselves from Johannesburg, Daryl, talking about the Indian bowling lineup, as good as they've been, not necessarily troubling South Africa's batters the way South Africa's bowlers troubled India's batters, and whether you do feel somewhere there's an observation to be made, or is the criticism not really to be afforded to the Indian bowlers in this series?
They were inconsistent. Only probably the most consistent was Shami. We saw Bumrah go wicketless on a pitch where it was expected that he'd bowl well. And that's been the story of their whole 3 test matches, inconsistencies. I mean, Shami was there and thereabouts. He was always asking questions, as they say, of the batsmen and really troubling them on bowler-friendly wickets. I think where India missed the trick, Ishan Sharma. And yes, we are smart. In hindsight, all of us are, but Sanjay had called for it. I had called for it going into this test match. So I think the balance wasn't quite there. And Ashwin, in the end, neither did Maharaj play a role in this series in any sort of manner, not even holding an ender. Umesh Yadav came in, 4-ball and over type of bowler. He had his little bit of success. So I think India desperately need to have thought about that 4th seamer or the introduction of perhaps someone outside of the squad, because ultimately the South African quicks took 55 wickets between Ngedi, Janssen and Rabada, and the Indian quicks ended up with less than 40. And that was really the talking point. India winning successfully in the last couple of years because of their bowling and their ability to be able to take on opposition batsmen out of India. But sadly, they were just, to me, they just weren't there this series. I don't know what it was. Perhaps it was a bit of fatigue. I thought that they at times lacked patience. But ultimately, the consistency versus South African pace attack, I thought there was a big difference. They gave South Africa too many easy runs, whereas after the first test, South Africa went back into pushing the Indian batsmen back, then getting it up. In the first test, they were fuller. Then they tried to surprise in the short ball. They turned that around and then just operated excellent lines and lengths led by Rabada. And I'll say it again, when he's bowling well, South Africa playing good test cricket.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, these are mere critical observations as a result of what we've seen of India's bowlers do. I think it's fair to say most Indian fans would offer a much longer rope to the Indian bowlers. They've, like Daryll Cullinan has pointed out, won India Test matches even when their batting has let them down. But that doesn't hide the fact that the batting has been a concern. Now, Daryll, if you were in that Indian dressing room, looking back at this series, seeing India take a 1-0 lead, which rarely happens on Test tours in South Africa, and South Africa be demoralized. You've seen KL Rahul get 100, Mayank Agarwal get a 60, and you think, great, these guys can now carry some sort of batting form forward. We saw what happened after that. There was no Virat Kohli in the second test. Pujara and Rane never really got going, with the exception of one innings. Where do you think the problem lies with India's batting? Was it something that they could have fixed after the first test or chose not to address? Did they get complacent after the first test, or did they just go into this series with too many batters out of form?
Well, I think the thing that South Africa did, they changed that length. Now they asked India to play back more, and with the movement, it wasn't really the pace, as we mentioned, it was more the movement and the bounce. They were found wanting. Now, you can't change that in a test match. So to me, it comes back to, right, these guys look good at home. They're generally on flat wickets, true wickets. They batted well in Australia. But suddenly with the movement and a bit of inconsistent bounce, they were found wanting going back, technically squaring up, playing from the crease. That is a technical issue. I don't care who you are, how long you've batted. You won't have a long career if you're playing from the crease. I think they were also found wanting. I found when they got in, there were too many soft dismissals. They had 155 for 3 in Johannesburg in that second innings. Yes. One up, they had the chance to bat South Africa out of the series. They lost 7 wickets, and it was careless batting. Yes, they were looking to attack. They felt that was the best way to go. But in and amongst that, when India batted well, South Africa batted well, there's been one constant player who's been at the crease. India went hell for leather after it, bowled out and left South Africa an unpredictable win, but ultimately they did win. Yeah, in this test match again, 150 odd for 5. There were chats about the pitch perhaps not being good. There was still belief that India only needed 200, and I go wholeheartedly with that 200 lead. It did flatten out, the ball got softer, but at 150 for 5, bowled out for 198. And there again, they threw away the advantage. So to me, the batting was far too inconsistent. The worst thing that happened from a batting perspective, probably, well, the Indian side, they won the first test match. You almost felt, well, right, finally it's arrived, India on a roll. They've just arrived, they played well. But South Africa came back. Now, on these sorts of pitches, and I firmly believe, I think, Rahul Dravid's a smart guy. He's going to go and look for guys now that are comfortable playing off the back foot. I've said it from day one. I've played against subcontinent sides whenever they've come to South Africa. This has been, of all the attacks, the one that's lacked the least pace, but it's offered bounce and movement. India aren't able to cope once the ball is doing that. And that's also a level of commitment. After the first test, I really felt that the South African batters really knuckled down, led by a great innings by Elgar, who said it's time for the talking to stop. He showed by example that brilliant 96, one of the best innings I've seen from any South African batsman. Whereas India, in contrast, were loose. It was almost as if, well, yeah, we go. But you can't help also saying that they missed Virat in that second test match. 50, 60 from him there could have meant a difference in the series. But so often, like test match cricket is. I said before it started, you'll go back to a period, a moment, an hour or two where you lost the test match or lost the series. And I think running with such tight margins as the series has shown, it's come down to those critical moments. And sadly, that's where South Africa, if you're an Indian fan, that's where South Africa were better. Whereas India, which surprised me, I must be honest with you, weren't as committed, I felt, and as organized. And that was the difference between winning and losing the series from a batting perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much to now take away from this series. Food for thought for Rahul Dravid, ifs and buts. If another couple of batters had supported Rishabh Pant, if Virat Kohli would have played that second test, or, there were opportunities even so. So, fairly summed up, Daryl. I'd like to talk about South Africa's bowlers a bit now. We've spoken of Keegan Peterson, Elgar, how they came to the party when it mattered. But who would have thought Marco Jansen would have this sort of impact in this series? It did seem like the second set of bowlers as well for South Africa didn't quite let that pressure release. With the exception of perhaps one session in the first test at Centurion, they were on the money. You think this has been a big series to identify the talent of Marco Jansen?
Before I get that, I just want to say on that inconsistency thing, excuse me, Ronak, but
Please.
India got 3 fifers. South Africa didn't get one. India
Sure.
got 2 test hundreds. South Africa didn't get one. So it was in between that where South Africa were better. Now, you mentioned Jansen. Now, he's no doubt a big find for South Africa. He's no doubt, you've got a tall left armer. Look, he, in contrast to Peterson, has had fairly good bowling conditions. You have to say that. But a man that's got good pace, he can bat. You know, he took a good catch at gully in the Indian innings, which just says that he's quite an athletic, sort of good all-round sort of guy. But I think he'll be worth gold. So, you know, you've got Ngidi. If Ngidi stays fit, you've got Rabada. You throw in a left-arm, tall left-arm seamer. That's suddenly a very good-looking quartet. And the moment that he settled like the rest, led by Rabada, it just suddenly just started to bowl. And I think that's the instruction. Charles Langeveld, as a bowling coach, you know, he's a very, very astute guy. He's earned his stripes. And that changed the length. But they were very, very consistent in that regard. So I think South Africa, if those 4 stay fit, they can really, for the next 3 to 5 years, because they've got that in them, can compete abroad. And we know today, let's hope Rabada picks up that pace. He'd have to tell us why he was off the pace, but he's led a top wicket taker, perhaps at a phase in his career. But I'm really excited by that. And I think Jansen has been a real find.
Yeah, I mean, with Andrik Nokke only expected to return to this team, you can imagine how much more commitment he'll get once Nokke comes in. That's a heck of a team. Yeah.
Well, you know, there's nothing better for a team than competition. You want to bring out the best in everyone, in each player. It's competition. Nothing else beats competition.
Sure. I can't help but again just extend on your, try and pick your brain on Rabada, because it seemed like he had such a big impact. Maybe he'll even be player of the series by the time we're done with this chat, as the awards are being handed out at Cape Town. But we were critical of him and perhaps the lack of red ball cricket. They were all a bit rusty, perhaps, at Centurion. It seemed like when Rabada got it right, Daryl, the complexion of the game's changed. He triggered that collapse that you speak of in Johannesburg. And maybe the South African attack needs a leader. Rabada's grown into that now with the likes of Mokel and Steyn and Philander all behind him.
Yes, he was off the pace. I was very critical of him in that first day of the test match at Centurion. He looked like he was going through the motions, call it rustiness, perhaps he wasn't quite there. But that was one of the big defining moments. Elgar leading by example. And then when India 155 for 3, he didn't get the new ball, remember? And Elgar had said that they looked to play mind games with him. When he ran in with that, he was that angry-looking Rabada. And when he's an angry-looking Rabada, I love to watch him bowl. But he suddenly clicked, and then it started to happen, and he found some mojo there, and we started to see that skill from day one. When he started playing test cricket, I was amazed at his control. It's the best. We had Donald, I played with Steyn, we saw them all, but for a young quick, for such a young age, he had great control, and he showed that it's in the series. But the great challenge for Kagiso is the amount of cricket he's going to play. He's always in demand. I really want to see him work harder on his batting. I'm convinced he can bat higher up. But he's going to be managing his workload, because I'll say it again, if he's bowling while South Africa are playing good test cricket, and he is head and shoulders above anybody else, in my opinion, has been the number 1 quick bowler in the world.
All right. And that pretty much caps what's been a memorable series for South Africa. If you were to give them just 1 or 2 things to keep in mind, Daryl, to make sure that this is now genuinely the start of, you could say, a cornerstone sort of moment, a transformation to put everything else aside and now build a solid team around Dean Elgar. Are there still areas that you think they need to work on? Does the future look bright for South Africa?
Well, you don't want to be sitting at home being relieved when you've won a series at home after being 1 down. Your home should be your fortress. The challenge today with sides with so much cricket and being away is finding time to prepare. and get guys into some sort of form when you arrive in a new country. We don't want to be scampering like we've had to and come from behind if we have to win in South Africa. So I think Markram's a concern. Van der Dussen, to me, just battled this sort of series. They still got a lot of work to do in their top 5 or top 6. The bowling, if they stay fit, they're fine. But the encouraging thing is obviously Peterson. And I think if we're going to say South Africa found a way forward and they can build on this, because they've been building for 10 years now. Eventually, you keep building. You look behind you, there's no material. It's gone. But those two are very positive points in the emergence of Janssen. And Elgar's done himself wonders as a captain. Tactically, I questioned him after the first test, but we're the guy leading by example. So yes, there are encouraging signs, without a doubt. But I'm really excited about Peterson. For me, it's going to be a tough call with Rabada, but I think we've seen the emergence of a quality little player. Early days, but what I see, I think he can really have a good long career. And that's great news, because that number 3 position is a big position for any test team.
All right, Daryll Cullinan, it has been an absolute pleasure just listening to you talk cricket, calling it as you see it, as it is, and I'm sure we'll hear more of that going forward. It's been wonderful. Thank you for talking to us through a very competitive and compelling test series, Daryll. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ronak. Always a pleasure to work with you. Thank you.
More from Daryll Cullinan, I'm sure, on ESPN Cricinfo. You'll also get Sanjay Manjrekar's views soon, later today, and do a most thorough postmortem on the Indian roadmap to go forward, as well as what happened in this series. So watch out for that. We'll be back for the ODIs as well. Until then, goodbye.